Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Some of you may have already seen this presentation sometime. I already presented this on, I think it was Vancouver and another meetup, Indianapolis, I think. But if you haven't seen this, then you will start learning how to do tail recursive functions and some other core functions from DataWeave as well. So I hope you like it. This is basically everything that you will see. You will see how to use some modules, specifically the values module, how to use functions, variables, the do statement, um, how to use or manipulate objects using the object structure, using if else, selectors, the default values, and other core functions or operators like is empty, reduce, map, with, or some of the other operators that you can see there. So first of all, I will start with the requirement that we had with this client. The requirement was to have this input JSON structure and output something like this. As you can see, some of the structure changed. This is now just an array of objects instead of a whole object with arrays and objects and arrays. But it has some rules. So first, for each object from this flight options array, you have to create one object inside this output array. Sounds pretty simple so far. The second thing is that the applied tax code from here will contain the value from the last connection object. So for example, here I have two connections objects, and at the end I'm just using the DEF tax code from here and not the EABC from here. Third, if the end of connection field is true, then you have to create a separate output object. For example, here I have end of connection true for this object and for this object. So I'm creating two separate objects, each one using its own tax code. So here you can see GHI and JKL. If there are end of connection fields that are true, and this is not the last object inside the connections array, then you have to create a new output object containing all of the false connection objects before this. For example, here we have three objects in this array, but here we have a false and here we have a true. So these two objects will basically be inside one object here. I will be using the tax code from the last object. And as you can see here, I have two objects inside the applied connections array. And this one just goes to its own little object. And finally, each applied connections object in the output, which is this one, must have a hard-coded type value connection and an incrementing index value throughout the complete output array. This is what made it hard, basically. I have, it starts with 1 and it continues incrementing throughout the end. So how to build this? We will be using the DataWeave Playground. You can still use this link, but it will redirect you to a new link that they have now, an official website, so that's awesome. I will be using this input payload, and this is the expected output. And I will show you how that looks. I already have here my GitHub repository where I have all my code, my input, and my output. So basically, I will go to my input data. I can just copy all this, and then I will paste it here. So let me know if at one point you cannot see my screen, and I will try to zoom this more. Okay. So this is my input. I have different connections objects. Some have 3, some have 1, and some are false, some are true. And this is what we will start working with. Oh, this is a new website, by the way, developer.mulesoft.com/learn/DataWeave. But you can still use dwlang.fun, and it will redirect you to this one. So this is my input, and then I will also have my expected output handy. I will put it in a div checker here. So I can, at the end, I can just confirm that I have the expected output. All right. So the first step is to extract the connections arrays. Basically, we have this whole object with arrays, and we just want to have an array of arrays of objects in the end. So to do that, I can just do payload dot flight options dot connections, and this will give me the array of arrays of objects. Let me know if there are any questions at one point. I will just go ahead. The second thing to do is to change all of the end of connections to true for the last connection object, because we just want to have one single array with all of these little objects. And some of the end of connections here are false for the last object in here. So we want to change that because it really doesn't matter if the last one is true or false. It will still be on its own object and it will still be using the tax code. So we want all of them to be true so they behave in the same way as we are expecting. So to do that, we are going to use reduce. Our item will be option, and the accumulator will be an array. And then, oh, I forgot. I will be using the do keyword. So if you're not familiar with do, this is the best example to use it. I just have to write do and then open curly brackets. And this basically starts, I can have local variables, local functions, and my own script here inside. So I will create a new variable to have my last connection. And then to do that, I will be using the object destructor here. And I will say flight option -1. And this will extract my very last flight option. And I can test this by doing this. As you can see, I have my variable and then I have my 3 dashes, just as we have here. And then I'm just outputting my last connection. And my very last connection is 102, which is this one. So far this is working. And then what I want to do is I want to update this to be true for all of these cases. So to do that, I am going to use the value module. I will do import update from value or values. Values. Okay. Now I can use this function to update this. Update end of connection with true. And so now this is true instead of being false like I had. And this will happen for all of the last objects. It's just that I'm not using the accumulator, so I cannot really see that. But if I do accumulator plus last connection, I can see all of the last objects. So I have 102, I have 888, 777, and so on. So after doing that, I just want to append the rest of the objects that were not changed at all. So I will create another variable called updated connections. And I will do again flight option. This time I will get from 0 to -2. And this will basically give me everything from the very first one to one before the last one. But then what happens if I try to do this, for example, with this one? Here I only have 0 and -1. So if I try to do this, I will get a null. And I don't want to get a null because then I cannot do this. Or yeah, I will see this null and I don't want to see that. So to fix that, I will be using a default and then empty array. So if this is showing a null, I don't want to see a null. I just want to see an empty array. In this way, I will get something like this. But don't worry, we'll fix that. So we have the updated connections, and then we just want to have the last connection. And this way, this gets fixed. Now I don't have an empty array. I have just the last connection that I fixed from here. So there's that. That's the only thing that I wanted to do here, to change all of this to true. I guess there are no questions. Okay. And so pay attention because here comes the first question. How can you import the update function from the values module in the script? And there are 3 different ways. You have to mention just one. You can just write it in the chat. I need the whole line. Yes, ISAS got it right. Import update from, it's actually DW, but yeah, that's fine. And values is with a capital V. But yeah, ISAS got it right. ISAS, can you send us, maybe Mahesh or Pravalika, your email so we can have you for the voucher? And here are the 3 answers. You can do import update from and the module, which is what ISA sent, and then import asterisk from then the module. This is basically importing all of the functions. So that also works, but I would really prefer if you use the first one. And finally, you can also do import and then this module, and then you have to use values colon update to call the function. So you would have to do something like this. All right. So moving on. Step number 3 is to flatten the array. So now that we have everything figured out and we can now make all of these just one giant array, because all of our end of connections are true here, so everything's cool. There are 2 ways to do this in this case. Since we're already using a reduce and we're already going through the whole array, instead of just doing a plus, instead of just appending to the array, we can do a plus plus. And what that does is basically using the function. So plus plus is a function and plus is an operator. So there are 2 different things. You can check the documentation to see what exactly is different. But if I use a plus plus, what happens is that it already flattens everything for me. It's not just appending things to the array. It's just putting everything here together. And the other way, if you're more familiar with flatten, you can also do that. This, and it also works. But I mean, if you already have the reduce and you're already going through everything once, it's just easier if you just do it here for performance issues. If you may have some performance issues later, because with the flatten, you will be going through the whole thing twice. But if there are no performance issues and you prefer to use flatten, that's also fine. I will do it like this though. So because we're so close to the end, second question, what are the two ways for flattening the previous array of arrays? All right, I guess BJ. Yeah, BJ, that's fine. So BJ Kulte, can you send your email to Pravalika or Mahesh, please? All right. And yes, the answer is using flatten or adding plus plus to the reduce instead of just one plus. Now, step number 4, and I think it's kind of the last step, but the most important one, how to actually build the tail recursive function. So you have 4 parameters here, or we're going to use 4 parameters for this case. One, we will call the connections array, is basically a current connections array that we now have. So this whole array will be our first parameter. And with each iteration or with each call that we do to the function, we will take one object out. So it will start like this, and then it will go like this, and then like this, and so on. Then we have the index accumulator array. It's an array with the indexes that are being accumulated for the index value. So if we check here in the output, the index value will be 1, and then 2, and then 3, and so on. So basically, for this first example, in the index accumulator array parameter, we will start with 1, and then we will use 2. And then we will empty it, and then we will put 3. And then we empty it, and it goes on. So for example, in this one, we will have 5 and 6, and then with the 7th one, we will use the 3 of them and then empty it again. Then we will have the actual index. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 11. This is just a number. And the connections accumulator array. This is the array that we will have at the end. So this whole array, it will start empty, and then we will start adding objects as we go on, and we need to create the object. So how to do that? Let's create a function, add index tail recursive, and I will call all of this code like this. So as I mentioned, first we will have the connections array, and this one will be an array of objects. Then we will have the index accumulator array, and this will be an array, just an array. And it will start with an empty array. So because right now we just have one parameter, which is the whole array that we had here, we don't want to be adding all of the other parameters every time that you call the function. So I will just leave this. This is basically like a default value. So if you don't send a second parameter, it will assume that it's an empty array. And I will do the same for the rest of them. So index is a number, and it will start at 1. And connections accumulator array is an array, and it will start as an empty array. And very important thing to know that you can only assign default values if they are the latest parameters. So for example, I wouldn't be able to do this. because then this needs to be, these three have default values and this one doesn't. So the only way for me to do this is if I assign some default value to this one as well. So just to keep that in mind if you're working with that. Now we start the function. The first thing that I always do for my tail recursive functions is to add the breaking point or the condition that will break the cycle, basically. So here we want to break the cycle if this connections array is empty, because we will start with a full array and then we will start taking out objects. So if it's empty, it means that we're done. Let's use if is empty connections array. Then we want to return the whole connections accumulator array, which is where we will be storing all of the output array. And else. And inside the else, I want to do this. I want to create another context to use another set of local variables here. So bar this connection. I will take the first connection that I'm getting from the input. So this connection is an object, and it will be connections array, which is this one, index 0. I think we can test this. Yeah, so we can start testing this already. I just have the very, very first one because I'm not calling this function again. So it's not a recursive function yet. It's just a regular function. And I have the first object. So this is basically the connection that I will be evaluating in each iteration. Then I will create another variable. This connection is end of connection. And this will help me to see if this is a true or a false. This will be a Boolean. This will be this connection dot end of connection. And notice that it's not letting me to just let it be like this, even though I know that this is a Boolean. This is because it's saying it's expecting a type Boolean, but got any. Since it doesn't know what kind of fields are inside my objects, DataWeave is not really sure that this is a Boolean. So check if I take this out, it will work because it's not checking that it's actually a Boolean. But this works a lot for me because let's say that sometimes instead of getting a false, I get like this. If I take out the Boolean, I will be getting here a string instead of the Boolean that I was expecting. So a lot of times, and this has happened to me a lot of times in another projects. So I really like to put here that it has to be a Boolean. And then to fix that, I can use this coercion, like equality coercion. I don't know how this operator is called, but basically it's saying, for example, if you do equals equals true, and then I try to output this, it will say it's false. If I do false, it will say it's true. But what if I do false? It will say it's false because false in a string is not equal to false in a Boolean. But if I change this, then it's true. Because this is a coercion. If I coerce this Boolean into a string, then they are equal. So yeah, I use this operator a lot because sometimes I'm not sure if I will be receiving a string or a Boolean, and I want to make sure that it will always be a Boolean here. So this has to be true. And then, now that I'm sure that this variable will be always a Boolean, I can now do another variable, the new index accumulator array. Remember that I told you that this parameter will be keeping the array of the indexes that I will be having here. So for this, I will use if, and then if this connection is end of connection, my previous Boolean, all right. Then if this is end of connection, that means that I'm basically stopping this and I want to start new. So I want to have an empty array for the next time that I call this function. And if this is not an end of connection true and this is false, then I want to continue incrementing this parameter with the index that I need. So instead of just putting an empty array, I will do index accumulator array plus index. Oh, I missed the else. And so I can check what this is getting. So for example, here for the first try, this end of connection is false. So I want to have this index here in this array in order to send this to the next iteration that I will do. And then when I get to this point, for example, this will empty the array for the next iteration to start as if it was something new. So that's how that works. And those are basically all of our parts. Now we have to connect them into the new function call. So we just do add tail recursive function, add index tail recursive, sorry. This is a call that we will be doing to the same function again. And I will have as a first parameter, since we already have connections array index 0, we will do basically connections array index 1, so the second one, to -1, from the second one to the last one. And remember that this could also be a null, and we don't want a null. And we specifically said here that this is an array object. So we want here to be a default, just an empty array. And then the second parameter that we have is the index accumulator array. And we already have that, which is this variable. So we just have to send this variable. And my third one is the index. It starts with 1 and it has to continue incrementing. So index plus 1. And finally, we have to build the actual output, this structure that we haven't built yet. So first, let's put what we already have will be first. And to that, we will be appending the new structure. So first we have what? Applied connection, applied text code. And the applied text code will be from this connection dot text code. Next, we have the applied connections array. And for that, we will be using everything that we have in the index accumulator array plus the actual index that we have right now. Because remember that we first had like just one, and then we want to have also the 2, 1 here, but then we're emptying this. So that's why this is happening. And you can already see here how it's going to look like. And then what we're doing with this array is we're doing a map to create the other structure that we have here inside. So type has to be connection. That's hard coded. So we just write, oops, type connection. And finally, index value. And index value will be the item that is inside this map. So anything that we had in the index accumulator array and the index. And now we can see how this looks. And we're missing an else. Oh, did I miss something? Oh yes, I missed an if here. Yes, if this connection is end of connection. So we only want to create the new output if the end of connection is true. So only in this case, we want to create the output. If not, we just want to keep on accumulating everything. So if this is the case, then we create everything that I just added. And then if not, then I'm just going to send the connections accumulator array without actually appending anything else to it. And there you have it. We have the connection 1, 2, 3, all the way to 11. And looks like everything is what we were expecting. We have here the 3, here we have the 1. And let's see if this is actually the output that we were expecting. Yep. This is exactly what we were hoping to get. So there's that. And now how does everything actually work? Let me show you here. So in the first iteration, we received this item, which is 111. And we had the index accumulator array, an empty array. The connections accumulator array was also empty, and our index was 1. So for the next connection, we want to have this index added into this index accumulator array. And we don't want to do anything to this connections accumulator array. So we just add this to this, and we move on. And then the second is the item 222. And this time the end of connection is true. So what we want is to take this 1 and this 2 and put them both in the new connections accumulator array with the new structure for the output. So we do that. And on the next iteration, look, we already have this with the 1 and the 2. And this is back to empty. So now our index is 3. We are here in the reference ID 333. And since this end of connection is also true, we want to just take this index and put it here. We don't have anything here. So we would be basically taking this index, putting it here, and then emptying this thing again. So now we have the index value 3 here. We're on index 4. The end of connection is true. So we want to send everything here again. Now the index value 4 is here. We're on index 5. And this time the end of connection is false. So we want to put this 5 here, and we don't want to move anything from here yet. Now we put the 5 here. We're on index 6, and our end of connection is false. So we want to put this index here again, and we don't want to move everything here. And this time we're on index 7, and the end of connection is true. So we want to take these 5, 6, and 7 and put them in the connections accumulator array. So we do that, and it goes on to be continued. So you can try this yourself. There is my GitHub repository. I think someone put it in the chat already. If not, I can put it again. Let me put it right now. There you go. And here you can find the code. I have 2 versions of code because the first one was a bit more complex for me, at least. It was using some math to sum and do some differences and do a lot of stuff to get the indexes done. And the version 2 is the one that I'm showing you right now. Here you have the input and the output and the README if you want to see the whole explanation. Basically, the version 3 is the one that you're seeing right now. Here you can find the slides, here you can find the code, and here you can find the recording that I did for the Indianapolis MuleSoft Meetup. And that's it. So moving on, I will show you just the third question.
Alex? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, go on. That's fine.
So what is the error? Oh, I didn't explain this one actually. I'm so sorry. Well, if anyone knows that, you can, nope, that's not. I forgot to explain that. I'm very, very sorry. Let me just do that really quick. And well, the first one that knows this can send it in the chat. Basically, let me show you right here. So this is how a regular recursive function looks like. If I do this sum, it's basically a summation, right? If I have 1, it's 1. If I have 2, it's 3, and it goes on. And so if I have 200, this is a number that I will have. And then what would happen if I get really, really, really close to the limit, which is 5. I get this error. And then you can answer whenever you want. Okay, someone answered. I think BJ, you already won. So it would be Pooja. So Pooja, can you send your email to Pravalika, Kishore, or Mahesh, please? And just to finish this explanation, what happens is that you have this recursive function, and as you can see, you can only have, well, you only have one parameter here, and you're basically calling the same function again from here inside. So it just kind of goes and goes, calling itself. And what happens here, if you use a tail recursive function, there's no error anymore. You can call more, there's no error. And why is that? Because we not just have the number that we want to sum, we are also keeping the result here. So by doing that, instead of just calling the number plus the result of this, I'm doing the whole function again, and I'm sending the result here, result plus number, and then the number minus 1. So I'm not actually calling the same function within the function over and over. I'm basically calling the function from, I don't know how to explain this very well. I'm very sorry. But yes, the thing is that you send the result here as another parameter, which is what we did here. We're sending, basically this is our result, right? So we're sending the result here as a parameter, which is this parameter. And instead of just calling itself over and over again, like here. And then the other thing is that you just keep adding stuff, well, removing stuff within these one parameter here. And here you send it the same way, and then the result. So as we have here, we are removing stuff from this side, and we're adding stuff to this side. And these two are just necessary for functioning, but basically these are the two parts that you need for a recursive tail recursive function instead of just having one. And now that I have you here with me, I actually want to show you something. I'm working on a repository where you can see some of the DataWeave scripts that I've worked on. I have here several. And here's the table of contents. You can see that I have one recursive function and I have several tailed recursive functions that you can see. So you can kind of get used to how it looks like and how to make it work. So this will also help you to get a better grasp on tailed recursive. Manik is saying Intel recursive processor doesn't need a reference to previous since each function call is self-sufficient to finish. Yes, I'm not very good at explaining the differences, but yes. So yeah, check this out. You can see all of the other tail recursive functions and see how they work. And if you have any questions, you can just let me know.
Hey Alex, we have a question from Ravi. If you could go to Q&A section.
Can we use ternary operator here? Do we have that in DataWeave? I don't think we do.
I haven't seen it.
I think it was available for mel expressions, but I don't think, yeah, it's basically an if else, as Manik is saying. So you can just use if else, but I don't know if you can actually do that with those operators. I don't think so because the question mark is used for something else. All right, any more questions? Here are all the references as well. So you can see everything that I just used. You can just go check um, the different operators and functions. And this blog explains very well the differences between recursive and tail recursive functions. I'm not that good at explaining that, as I just mentioned, but you can see that blog post. That helped me a lot to also get started on that. And let me know if you have any more questions. I'm happy to help.